Guys, so this is AP World History, Chapter 23, The Transformation of Europe. All right, so today this chapter is going to look at several different things that are happening at Europe in this time, from the Protestant Reformation to the Catholic Reformation to pretty much states becoming, or lands becoming more states and becoming more sovereign. In addition to capitalism, the development of capitalism, as well as the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. So a lot to cover. Make sure you take good notes for your study cards. And I've also included some questions in here to consider that might help you with your study cards. So let's go ahead and get started. So this chapter starts with the fragmentation of Western Christendom. And just think about what that word means, fragmentation. We see the word fragment in here, so that means part. So pretty much the idea of Christianity as this unifying force is going to fall apart with the Protestant Reformation. And we see the Reformation start when the church is being challenged, when the Catholic Church is being challenged, and people are kind of looking at the church as like, this entity that's supposed to simply be for religious purposes, and people are beginning to wonder, well, why are you involved in these political affairs? And why are you abusing your power as a church? There was a disapproval of abuses that increased and the demand for personal involvement with the divine. So people were kind of saying, you know what, you're moving beyond your authority. You're going into politics. That's not right for you to do. You're abusing your power by influencing politics. That's not right for you to do. And we don't feel close to, the divine anymore. We don't feel close to the church anymore. So one of the people that really calls out the Catholic Church against what they're doing is Martin Luther. And he was actually a priest, a monk in the Catholic Church. He wrote this pamphlet called the 95 Thesis, okay? And what it did was it attacked the self-indulgences. So what the indulgences are, you're pretty much paying for your sins. So it was like, you commit a sin, and in order to kind of stay good and for your sins to be forgiven, you would pay a certain price for that sin. So it calls so he called in his 95 Thesis for a reform of the church. And what he said is that you need to close the monasteries. You need to translate the Bible into everyday language, because the Bible was in Latin and only the priests or people in the monasteries and the churches could understand it. And he also said that the Bible is the only source of religious authority. He said that these priests are kind of messing with the word of the Bible and interpreting it incorrectly, and only the Bible is the true source. It can't be what the priest says or what the bishop says or what the pope says. The only source is the Bible itself. So what ends up happening is the Catholic Church becomes very angry at him, and they pretty much exile him. And he moves into Germany for this time. And he will begin to spread his word into these German states. And it will spread into the German populations. And people will begin to agree with what he's saying and say, yeah, you know what? Why is the church, being involved in these political affairs? Why do I have to pay for my sins to be forgiven? Why can I not read the Bible on my own? What makes these bishops the final authority, or the Pope the final authority in the church? So as he's spreading his word, people are beginning to believe in him. People are beginning to follow him. One of the main events that we see that is influenced from the Protestant Reformation is the English Reformation. So the English Reformation starts with Henry VIII. He was not granted a divorce by the Pope, so he broke ties with the church and started the Anglican Church in England. So pretty much the story goes that Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife because his wife could not provide him a male heir. So he wanted to marry another woman to provide him that male heir. So he went to the church and told them, the situation. Hey, I don't have a son. I want to marry somebody else. And the church said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't recognize that as, being right in the eyes of the church. You can't just, get a divorce because she's not providing you a male heir. So Henry VIII, he'll become upset and he'll sever ties. And when he severs ties, he will start his own church in England. and that will become the Anglican Church in England, and that is the main church of England to this day. But it was all because he didn't get a divorce. They didn't allow a divorce. So that English Reformation stems from the Protestant Reformation. We also see John Calvin. He will impose a strict code of morality and discipline. He'll support Martin Luther's ideas, and he'll kind of come up with his own Protestant Reformation religion, which will be Calvinism. And the idea is to model a Protestant community, a very well-behaved, strict community practices high morals. So important to note that the Protestant Reformation, look at the word Protestant. Well, you should see the word protest in here. Okay, so the word protest means you're speaking out against something. And then right here in Reformation, you should see the word reform. Reform means to change. So the Protestant Reformation was about people speaking out for change. Okay, that's really what it was in terms of religion. People speaking out for change in their religion. So that's really what it was about. So what ends up happening, before we move on, some of the questions to consider: what abuses was the Catholic Church doing that caused the reason for reform? What did Martin Luther accuse the Roman Catholic Church of doing? Meaning, what were they doing that he felt was wrong? What did Martin Luther want to see changed? And why do you think these series of events were called the Protestant Reformation, which I pretty much explained to you? And what was imposed in John Calvin's Protestant community? So, like I said, the response to this Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church will see this, and they will kind of get upset, obviously, that they're being called out on what they were doing, but they also begin to realize, you know what? If we're going to keep people and we want people to still believe in us, then we need to change as a church. So they will have something called the Catholic Reformation. So Catholic, obviously, is the type of religion, and then the Reformation to reform is to change. So the Catholic change, all right? And it starts with the Council of Trent. And what the Council of Trent was an assembly of Catholic officials. So these Catholic officials got together at several meetings on and off for a few years, for about 10 years. And what they did was they addressed not only doctrine, but reform, meaning not only the way we're going to practice our religion, but also what we need to change about it. And they defined the theology in detail, and they acknowledged the abuses, meaning that they said, you know what, we're right, you're right, what they're saying is right, what we're doing is wrong, we are abusing our position. We shouldn't be telling people that they can pay for their sins. They have to seek forgiveness and penance in order to do that. They demanded strict standards of morality again, because at this time we would see a lot of the priests and the bishops abuse their power. And not only that, you would see a lot of priests and the bishops who were, involved in relationships with women and having, children out of wedlock when they're not even supposed to be involved with women at all. So they had to demand that strict standard of morality again, and they established seminary schools to prepare priests properly. They said, you know what, if we're going to make somebody a priest, they need to go to school for it. They need to understand what it takes to be a priest, what's involved in being a priest. So these were some of the changes that the Council of Trent made. We see St. Ignatius of Loyola. He, at the time, wanted to reform the church and the doctrine, so he founded the Society of Jesus. So he's the founder of the Society of Jesus. And what the Society of Jesus was an order where members have a very rigorous and advanced education. So this order was extremely strict. You had to follow very high standards. If you were going to be in this order, you were going to get educated. A lot of the times, you see this order influence kings who welcomed them into their land. They were very effective missionaries, especially in places where we didn't see a lot of people convert, like in India and China. And this showed really that Christianity could be global. It wasn't just a Western religion with the Society of Jesus. And they used their influence, like I said, to support Roman Catholic policy in the lands where they were advisors. So some questions to consider: why was the Council of Trent important? And why were Jesuits important? So along with this Reformation, this change not only with the Protestant Reformation, but the Catholic Reformation, we also see witch hunts and religious wars take place. In terms of the witch hunting and the witches and gender alliances, they believed that there were people that made alliances with the devil, and that these alliances turned these people into witches and gave them these supernatural powers, and that it helped to explain unpleasant events. So if your crops were damaged, it was because a witch had done it. And a lot of times they killed these people by hanging them or burning them at the stake. And this witch hunting and all that would pass on into the colonies that these European countries had in the Americas. So the people who were accused of being witches, there were some men, but for the most part, it was women, mainly the poor, the old, or the widowed. So if you were like single and you were old, and people thought it was weird. So why are you not married? Why are you haven't you remarried again if you're widowed? You've never been married. So all those things made people suspect that you would be a witch when obviously it had no real justification, no rationale to it. In addition to the witch hunting, we also see religious wars going on. And these wars were between the Protestant and Catholic communities. So Philip II of Spain, he unsuccessfully attempted to return England to Catholicism. Because remember, England had broken away from the church with King Henry VIII. So when Queen Elizabeth came in, she was the head of the Anglican Church. Philip II wanted to marry her, and that would mean that if he did, then they would take on the religion of what he was, which was Catholic. So Queen Elizabeth was more about standing her ground and protecting her country. So they came into a war through the Spanish Armada. King Philip sent a fleet of ships to go and kind of get Queen Elizabeth to marry him. And the response to that was, well, I'm going to send my ships out against yours. And King Philip was unsuccessful, and Queen Elizabeth was able to hold him off. So that was one of the religious wars that we saw. Another one was the 30 Years' War. So this was a religious war that was led to a continental conflict, meaning that it was at first, between Catholics and Protestants. That's how the war started. But later it became more about politics and economics. It became, a position of, well, if we fight against them, we could get land also. And that would help boost our, economic power base. So the people involved weren't just Catholics and Protestants anymore. Now we see states being involved, like the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, the German, the Swedish, the Danish. And it was the worst European conflict before the 20th century. Okay, it pretty much just, made a mess of the European continent at that time. And it was something that had to be considered in terms of how it was going to be fixed. So that's really what's going on in terms of seeing Christianity or the Roman Catholic Church lose its power within Europe. So after we see that, some of the questions you need to consider are, why did people believe witchcraft explained, or what did they believe witchcraft explained? Religious wars were usually among what groups? And summarize the 30 Years' War. So like I said, pretty much the Catholic Church will end its power in Europe, and we're going to see the consolidation of sovereign states. So pretty much here is where we're seeing what you kind of begin to know now as countries that you recognize on maps, like Britain and France and Spain. All right, now they're kind of saying, hey, you know what? We are going to be our own power base. So with Charles V, it starts with him, the attempted revival of empire. He has, heired to him the Habsburg family dominated by the Holy Roman Empire. He's going to inherit the Habsburg Austrian domains, and that's going to be Germany, Bohemia, Switzerland, Northern Italy, and Spain. He will inherit all of that. Okay, and Charles V, he did not enforce his authority over these new land holdings. He really wasn't about, like, you know what, let me try to make this an empire again. Instead, he kind of just let the people rule themselves. The lands were ruled by their own laws and customs, and he used the army just kind of to put down any rebellions. He didn't use it to take over the lands that he had. Some of the foreign challenges are that the French kings were under the impression that Charles V would absorb their realm, and they did what they could to prevent this. So as the kings in France find out that, Charles V hasn't inherited some of their land, they think, well, he is going to start this empire again. And so they kind of ally with Charles V's enemies. And, just to make sure that he doesn't start an empire again. So Charles V never established a vast realm and allowed those within his realm to determine their own religion. And that was huge at the time. He's saying, you know what? No, I don't want the empire. Don't worry, I'm not going to take your land. And you, even though I'm Catholic, you can establish your own religion in the lands that I have inherited. I know some of you are not Catholic, and that's fine. You decide what you want your religion to be. So that was pretty big of him to do. So, question 12, how does the Habsburg family gain control of so many territories of the Holy Roman Empire? And 13, what two things prevented Charles V from expanding his empire? So, as we see that Charles V pretty much is let go and has no intent of creating a new empire or a new realm, we see new monarchs develop. Okay. They developed through the help of finance. New monarchs were sought to enhance their riches. The French, as we talked about in the previous chapter, they levied direct taxes on sales and households and salt trade. That's how they were able to make their money and increase the strength of their monarchy. England, they will raise fines and fees for royal services, and that's how they are able to strengthen their monarchy. In terms of state power, new monarchs enlarged their administrative staff. They collected taxes, implemented policies, and maintained a standing army, except for the British. The British did not maintain a standing army. The French did maintain a standing army, as well as the Spanish. So it's important to note here that the monarchs are really going to be the powerhouses now. Okay? And what I mean by that is that we see in the past there were kings and queens, and they had the princes and the princesses and the dukes and the duchess and the barons and the baronesses, and you had this whole nobility that had power. It's not going to be like that anymore. The only people who are going to have the power are going to be the kings and the queens, and they're going to, at times, depending on the country, join that power with the people. But the prince, the princesses, the dukes, the duchess, the baron, the baronesses, they will no longer have really any power. The power will be coming from the people. Okay, so moving on to the Spanish Inquisition. So this was within, obviously, Spain between Ferdinand and Isabel. They will be the monarchs of Spain, and they will get the support of the Roman Catholic Church to impose this Inquisition. And pretty much what it was a time period in Spain where they were throwing out anyone who was practicing Islam or Judaism. They wanted it to be a solely Catholic realm, a solely Catholic state. So they had to do this. And it served as political and religious purposes. Like I said, not only did they have obviously the monarch support, but they also had the church's support in doing this. And the Inquisition investigated cases of heresy. So if you were thought to be a practicing Jew, a practicing Muslim, then you were probably going to be beheaded or burned at the stake. They deterred nobles from adopting Protestant views as well. So anything where you were a threat to the Catholic Church, you were going to be probably tried and killed for it. All right, so your question to think about here, what did the kings of France, Spain, and England do to add to their wealth? How did the Protestant Reformation help increase state power? And summarize the Spanish Inquisition. So besides new monarchs, we see constitutional states develop as well. And this is really a blending of not only the people, but of the king and the queen, of the monarchs. So constitutional states, the government claimed limited powers and recognized the rights pertaining to individuals and representative institutions. English had a constitutional monarchy, and so did the Netherlands. They also had one as well. And it strengthened not only the state, but the merchants flourished. So again, like I said, we're getting rid of that nobility. The only people who are going to really be in power are going to be the king and the queen, as well as the elected government, or the people who are representing or the representatives of the people. And at this time, you see really two main states that are doing this, England and the Netherlands, the Dutch. So, in terms of England, you see an attempt at instituting taxes without parliament approval. One of the kings begins to do this, and Parliament is saying, "Hey, you know what? We have this agreement that we're going to make the decisions, together. You have to have our approval if you want to raise the taxes." And not only that, what you're doing, you're having ornate ceremonies, led to the Puritans to believe that they were seeing elements of Catholic Church. So not only are they mad about the taxes, and the Parliament, just to backtrack, is like the Congress of England, okay? So not only, like I said, is the Parliament seeing like, hey, you're trying to raise taxes without us approving it, but not only that, like, we got rid of the Catholic Church. Why are you doing these ceremonies that look like the Catholic Church? You know? So they want to get rid of that. So what ends up happening is King Charles I and Parliament are unable to communicate. They cannot come to a decision on what's happening. King Charles feels like he has the right and the power to do this, and the Parliament says, no, we have to give you the right and the power to do this. So what ends up happening is they kind of go to war within each other. That's where the English Civil War comes from. And the Parliament will hire Oliver Cromwell to capture Charles I. They do, and they behead him. They pretty much kill him. And after that, Cromwell and his military will come into power, but it's going to be a tyranny. And the Parliament will say, you know what? We need to get rid of you, and we need to have a monarchy in place. So it gives power, they give power to James II's daughter, um, who is at the time married to William of Orange. So Mary and William of Orange will take power, and this will be a glorious revolution, known as the Glorious Revolution, this turn of power to them, because there was no battle that took place. It was just kind of like, you can't do your job anymore. We're going to give it to your daughter and her husband, and that's pretty much what happened. And Mary and William agreed to the terms of Parliament. They said, you know what, we're right. You're right. We need to work together. So it provides representative government through this glorious revolution. As for the Dutch, we're going to see King Philip of Spain try to suppress Calvinist movement in the Netherlands. King Philip of Spain, he he is the son of King Charles V. So when King Charles V dies and gives up his power, King Philip inherits all of that land. And he tries to kind of make it more Catholic, and it doesn't work, especially in the Netherlands, especially in these Austrian areas. And it's going to lead to a rebellion against the Spanish rule. And pretty much the Spanish rule will, in a way, kind of give up because they don't have the strength to hold on to that. So the anti-Spanish alliances will claim independence, leading to the foundation of a Dutch republic where the people are going to have the say. So these are the real two constitutional states that we see exist during this time, which is very kind of revolutionary at this time because we're seeing monarchs. So some of the questions to consider: which state practiced constitutionality? What caused the English Civil War? What was the result of the Glorious Revolution? Why did merchants believe it necessary to be a part of political and state affairs? And that's pretty much it. So let's move on to the absolute monarch. So absolute, you need to think of that word, absolute. What does that mean? It means total control, total power. All right, so these are monarchies where, they are in absolute control. The king and queen is in absolute control. All right. We see this in two main areas. We see this with the French, and we see this with Russia. So with the French, we have the Sun King, or also known as King Louis XIV. They called him the Sun King, and he epitomized royal absolutism. And that's what absolutism is again, the idea that these kings or queens have total control, total power. He had many lavishes, wealth and attention for himself and the nobles. He kind of got rid of the nobility, like I said, and he decided to pick and choose who he wanted to be in his government. And this led him and his administrators to run the state freely because he had the choice to decide who he wanted to represent the government. We see also absolutism in Russia with Peter I. So the Tsars and Romanov in Russia also implemented absolute monarchy. Peter I, also known as Peter the Great, he wanted to make Russia into a military power like Western Europe. He saw the Western European states as these great military powers and as probably like the strongest states that there were at this time. All right. And that's what he wanted. So, what he did was he sent his people over there to learn about Western life, how to be more, Western. So, he toured the Western Europe and made reforms in his army, his aristocracy, and his government. He had his army go to school officially just, to practice military strategy and tactics. The aristocracy, he kind of got rid of them and he strengthened his government. Also, he created St. Petersburg, which served as the physical transformation of Russia. It was a capital and a seaport. So this is like the main like trading center that he wanted to have. So after him, we see Catherine II. She will also impose reforms. She wants to make the government more efficient, so she streamlines it. She makes it like I think about 50 districts in Russia. She will promote economic development through public works and infrastructure. Disgruntled soldiers led rebellion and killed the noble landowners and government officials. So what ends up happening is, Catherine, she has good intent and she wants to help the peasants and the serfs who are in Russia. And what begins happening is that these peasants and serfs begin to rebel against their landowners and the government officials. Catherine sees this and thinks, well, you know what? Maybe it wasn't a good idea that I tried to help them and support them. So after this, she kind of reins in her control and she focuses more on the absolutism of the monarchy and says, you know what? Obviously, I can't be nice. I can't, help others. And I have to focus on me having this total control over my land. So the questions to consider here: what did King Louis and ministers do? When returning to Russia from Europe, what reforms did Peter I put into place to make it a great military power? And after a rebellion within her land, Catherine the Great realizes she has to do what to keep and maintain her power. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is the European state system. So like we have seen already, the Roman Catholic Church no longer has any power over Western Europe. We see these different states coming into play and developing, like with England and France and Italy and Germany. And we've seen wars with the 30 Years' War between the Protestants and the Catholics, but then that changes into like an economic and political war. So the question is, how do we maintain peace now that we are becoming, our own states? And that comes with the Peace of Westphalia. So what the Peace of Westphalia was one, it ended the 30 Years' War. Okay? It ended that war and then it made the states come to an agreement and it created independent competing states. Once this war ended, everybody kind of was like, you know what? We need to recognize ourselves as sovereign and equal, meaning we are our own state and we are no better than any other state that has now developed. So England is no better than France, France is no better than Spain, Spain is no better than Germany. Okay? That was one thing they established. The other thing they established, besides being sovereign and equal, was that they had to handle their own affairs. Meaning that if I got something going on in England, a problem going on in England, somebody in France cannot come in and say, let me fix the problem for you. No, I'm going to handle it on my own as my own state. And the other thing was that government no longer religious based, but as sovereign states, meaning that your government was not going to be because you were Catholic. Your government was not going to be because you were a Protestant or you were Lutheran. Your government was not based on your religion anymore. It was based on whatever system you have put into place to run your government, whether it be a monarchy, whether it be a constitutional monarchy, whether it be an absolutist monarchy. Whatever it is, that's what is going to be, not the religion. So this falls into the balance of power. And so we have these rules in place. We're sovereign, we're our own people, we're all equal to each other, we're going to handle our own business. Religion is not going to determine our type of government. How do we make sure that happens? So what ends up happening with the balance of power, it says that no ruler wanted to see another dominate, meaning that they didn't want to see each other take over one another. So we have a suppression of rule, meaning that if we see something happening, then it is our job to help each other out so we can remain independent. So it's risky, but close one door, open another. So if we see like Germany trying to invade France, then we as the other powers, to maintain the balance, need to stop Germany from doing that. And that would help maintain that balance of power. So with, all this trying to keep everybody equal and on their own side and within their borders, we see a lot of military development occur. Okay, so we see this creation for stronger militaries in these European states. Demand for better armament, because you never know what might happen or if somebody might want to break this little peace treaty we have going on. So some areas found no need for better or new armament. So obviously all the Western European states, they're like, getting their military stronger, getting their militaries more developed in terms of the technology that they use. But some areas didn't see that. Some areas like India, the Muslim territories in China, they didn't see a need to develop their military because everything was fine within their borders. They were not attacking each other. And this will actually ultimately be a detriment to them, will be a negative, because Europe is going to develop really, really fast, and they are going to slow down in their technological development, especially in military power. So some questions to consider: what did the Peace of Westphalia stem from? What did the Peace of Westphalia do? Essentially, what was the balance of power? And why didn't the areas of China, India, and Islamic lands develop militarily? Okay, so moving on to the economic side with early capitalist society. So American food crops and population. The Columbian Exchange is going to, obviously, because we're exchanging foods, it's going to lead to population growth in Europe. Some of the more popular foods will be potatoes, maize, tomatoes. Diseases will dissipate. The diseases that they brought in from the Americas, those will go away. The population will grow in Europe, except for the period, obviously, with the 30 Years' War, because it was a continental conflict. And of course, because we see population growth, we're going to see more cities develop. We're going to see urbanization. And cities will grow in certain areas for various reasons. Sometimes the state will say, you know what, this is where we want to start our government. Other times they'll say, you know what, this is a perfect place for commercial and industrial center to make money and to make business. So it really just depended. So the nature of capitalism. So urbanization led to economic development. That kind of makes sense. This is your hub where you're making your commercial activity and stuff. Capitalism. This is what capitalism is. It is the economic system in which private parties make their goods and services available on a free market and seek to take advantage of market conditions to profit from their activities. Business owner, not the government. So this is what we have today. We have a capitalism, a free enterprise society where people give you services or offer you services, and they are going to make a profit from the services that you purchase from them. So this is not government owned. This is you as a business owner making money. Some of the things we see are people get involved into the joint stock companies, and the government actually supported these joint stock companies. The government supported capitalism because it was going to benefit them as well. They favored the capitalist enterprise. They authorized that these joint stock companies charter, explore, and conquer and colonize. They wanted these people to go off and explore, find areas to exploit the resources from and bring them back, because it was only going to make their country stronger. So expansion and colonial rule was imperative to capitalism. These states like England and France and Spain, they believed it was important to go out and colonize and to bring more resources back, because, again, it's going to make them stronger against their other states, even though it's supposed to be all friendly and a balance of power. I mean, we obviously know that's not necessarily true. Other thing we see is the putting out system. So capitalist entrepreneurs moved their production into their countryside. So what this means is that before, you had like the craft, the guilds, and the guilds were like in the Middle Ages. And what they were the groups of people, like all the blacksmiths that worked together, and they made, all maybe the weaponry and the armory and stuff like that. And they could set a price as a guild, Now people are like, why do we have to listen to your fixed price? Why do we have to pay your fixed price? We can go off and, maybe do it on our own for a cheaper price. And that's where the putting out system comes in. The putting out system was maybe what you know as like a cottage industry. And what that is that they began to send their raw materials to the countryside and say, you know what, we need, 50, 500 cloths, 500 cloths to be made in a week. And they could get it at a lower price through these people who are working in the countryside. So the entrepreneurs would spend little on the wages and they made a better profit because when they got those cloths, they could bring them into the city and sell them at a higher price. So this was the early source of outsourcing. And this time often was referred to as proto-industrialization because it was the first time we see the idea of industry, but it's like in the beginning stages. So some of the questions to consider here: what led and caused the idea of capitalism? What is capitalism? In what ways did the states and merchants help each other when it came to capitalism and economics? And what was the putting out system? And what did the putting out system represent? So capitalism is going to affect the social change in early modern Europe because now we're seeing entrepreneurs come, and they're going to be reliant on not only each other, but they're going to be reliant on outside sources like the colonies or outside states as well. So serfdom in Europe was tied to Russian peasants to the land. So serfdom was something that we saw again in the Middle Ages in period 3. But for Russia, it lasted all the way up into the 1800s. And it tied Russian peasants to the land. So if you're a serf, remember, serf is a peasant who is bound to the land. And the only way you can move away from the land is if you get permission from your landowner. So they practiced serfdom in Russia, and the laws created tight state control over the Russian labor force. And serfdom played an important role in capitalism. Eastern Europeans helped Western Europe flourish. They were able to sell raw materials to Western Europe at a cheap price, and it was hard for Western Europe to flourish as much as it wanted because it was dependent on Eastern Europe for some of the raw materials. Profits and ethics pose moral challenges. So during this time, we're going to see people making a lot of money because of capitalism. And it posed this moral challenge, like, was it right to be making so much money? It was considered greedy. Medieval theologians saw it as selfish and greedy and immoral. Like, why are you making so much money? You don't need that much money. That kind of idea. And bankers were not willing to make unsuccessful risks without profit. One of the big things was the idea of having interest. Like, if people were going to take out a loan, they would have interest added onto it. And a lot of the church thought, why are you doing that? That's unnecessary. That's unfair money. But the people who were lending out the loans were like, well, there's no way I'm just going to lend out money and get the same amount back. I'm going to make a profit on it. And that's where the interest rate came. We also see Adam Smith, the father of capitalism. He said that the community gains more through individual interest. Pretty much saying, you know what? Capitalism is good. What's happening here is good because we as individuals are going to make more, and we're going to see that distributed to the community. The other thing we see develop is this idea of a nuclear family. Capitalism favored the nuclear family, the important economic, social, and emotionally. As you're making more money, people are now able to, actually marry for love. Before, people were married out of convenience, what made sense. We're going to marry because we need to survive. But now we see it as we're going to marry because we love each other. So we see the nuclear family develop. Okay, so the last thing we're going to look at is the science and enlightenment. So science would also be known as the scientific revolution, and the enlightenment came after the scientific revolution. So this one came first, science, and then the enlightenment. Scientific revolution, then the enlightenment. This one influences the enlightenment. So the scientific revolution was really a time where people begin to question what the church is saying in terms of science. Like the Protestant Reformation will influence the scientific Reformation because people are questioning the church already about religion and the abuses and all like and stuff like that. So then science comes along and they're kind of like, well, is what the church really telling me true? So this revolution will shift things. So the Ptolemaic theory and the planetary movement. Ptolemaic theory that the Earth is motionless and nine spheres surround it. This is also known as Earth-centered, also known as geocentric. So in the beginning, there was the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe. We were the center, and we had the 9 planets going around us, as well as the sun going around us. This was known as geocentric idea. We obviously know that is not true, okay? But it's really Copernicus that makes it clear that, hey, this is false. He stated that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the universe, and that the earth revolved around the sun. This idea is also known as heliocentric. So geocentric, earth is the center. Heliocentric, sun is the center. All right. Christianity saw this idea as threatening because they always taught that no, earth is the center. And so it's kind of going against them, which is, again, making them look wrong and weak. So questions to consider: what did the Ptolemaic universe look like, and what did the Copernican universe look like? And a sun-centered universe is also known as what? So other people that we see that influenced the scientific revolution: Galileo Galilei, and also Kepler. Kepler said that there is a planetary orbit. Johannes Kepler said that the planetary orbits are elliptical and not circular because it was believed that the planets move in a circular motion around the sun. And Kepler said, no, it's more like an ellipse, like an elongated circle. And then Galileo Galilei discovered that there were spots on the sun, mountains on the moon, moons orbiting Jupiter, and came up with the modern law of inertia. Isaac Newton, you should know, universal law of gravitation, and that there were ebb and flows of the tides as well because of gravitation. Amélie de Charlotte, she was a mathematician and a physicist, and she translated Isaac Newton's principles of mathematics, and she transformed geometry into calculus. So, what accomplishments and discoveries did Galileo make? What about Isaac Newton? What was this time period of advancements in astronomy and science known as? Okay, so we see the scientific revolution take place. People are beginning to question, the church in terms of the science. Not only that, people are beginning to observe the world around them in terms of science and say, you know what, we need to think rationally about it. And so this, moves into the Enlightenment time. And what this is similar to the scientific revolution in terms of asking questions about things, but the Enlightenment is more focused on society. Scientific revolution is focused on the observations of science, and then the Enlightenment is focused more on the observations of society and how we act as a society. So we see Voltaire. He attacked institutions sponsoring intolerant and oppressive policies, very much spoke out against the church and what the church was about. We also see that he had this belief in deism, believed in the existence of God, but denied the supernatural teaching of Christianity, like the idea that Mary was conceived, Mary conceived Jesus out of immaculate conception, that kind of thing. Deists saw the universe as an orderly realm and that God set the universe in motion and established natural laws, but did not take interest in its development. He was like a watchmaker. So pretty much saying God started it and he said, whatever happens, happens, and I'm going to let it happen. Okay, so why was this era called the Enlightenment? And what was Voltaire's philosophy? And what is deism? Sorry. And then just make sure that you're able to briefly put the following events and explain these following events: the Enlightenment, the Reformation, Scientific Revolution, and the Renaissance. They are not in order as you see them there. So you need to know the order they went in, what they did, and how each one influenced the other. Definitely you will see this on your quiz. So make sure you understand it very well. All right, I know this is probably the longest screencast that I've done. I'm really, really sorry, but it was all really important. So good luck on your quiz, and we will see you the next time.